Well, hello 4-H. What a wonderful evening to spend with you. My name is Brenda Langerud, and Kim and I were colleagues in North Dakota. So we still like to communicate and share information. And something that I've become involved in Minnesota is Master Gardeners. So I wanted to share with you this evening some information about growing succulents. This past February, Kim invited me to be part of your 4-H activity day, and we did a couple workshops on succulents. But there's a little bit more information and some questions that have come up in between. So I thought we'd do a quick review. We have four main sections that we're going to talk about. Then we're also going to talk about one extra tip on it. And in between, there's going to be a chance. I think you have a chat box for you to type in some questions, and Kim will keep track of that. So make sure you type away, right? All right, let's start with our first PowerPoint slide. Kim has those on light, and succulents and light. Why we need light. There we go. Okay, our succulents like a bright light. They are from the cacti family. They originated in deserts, and so they are used to many more hours of much more intense light than what we typically have here in the upper Midwest. When you are growing succulents at home, you're going to look for a south-facing window with hopes that they have at least 3 hours of direct sunlight a day. But at the same time, if you'll notice, the next point on the slide is some will scorch in direct light. They can also get sunburned, just like we can. So sometimes in our very intense summers in the upper Midwest, July, August especially, when you might be prone to becoming sunburned, keep an outlook for your succulents too. And when they are sunburned, they don't become red like we do, or pink. Instead, the leaves will turn brown or white as they bleach out from color. If you have succulents that are not receiving enough light, a good clue is how they grow. They become stretching, elongate. It has a very technical term, elongation. They are reaching and searching for that light. An alternative is to use a plant light. When you're shopping for a plant light, you want to look for one that has a broad spectrum of light. Not just white light or just blue light, but a combined spectrum. And some of our new LED plant lights are really perfect because they don't become so warm underneath. Those can be a great way to make sure that your succulents have enough light during the winter time. Okay, now I'm going to have Kim give that camera back to me for a second. All right, so let's talk about succulents just in general and make sure we are all on the same page what we're talking about. They're a very popular plant right now. They come in lots of shapes, colors, and sizes. These are two of the most popular ones of varieties. And our one here that looks kind of like a rosette, it's actually called a queen's crown, comes in many different colors. And that's one of the reasons it's so popular, because we can color coordinate it to event. For hosting an event. The main key about succulents is the fat, squishy leaves that they have. You can see it in between my fingers there of how thick that leaf is. That's a much thicker leaf than we are used to the daisies that we find in our gardens or the roses that we order from the greenhouse. And the reason that they are thick and fleshy is because they are full of water. This is how our desert plant is surviving. It's storing water in those leaves. And we're going to talk a lot about water very shortly. But right now, we want to make sure that you know that your succulents receive enough light. Okay? Kim, let's go on to the next slide. Potting and soil. Our succulents need a different type of soil. If you go out into a garden or a field here in the upper Midwest, if you scrape or push away the upper 1 or 2 inches of crust that are dry, take a hoe, spade, a small garden trowel, and dig down about 3-4 inches past that top crust. When you pick that soil up with your hand, what you're going to find is it's moist. And if you take a clump of it in your fist and squeeze it tight, you're probably going to get a ball of soil, which is wonderful. That's a thick, rich, loamy soil. It's wonderful for growing things that we grow up here in the upper Midwest, but it is not wonderful for succulents. Succulents have very fine, fibrous roots. That's so that they can absorb all of that water that we're going to talk about shortly very quickly. But it means that they're not strong enough to push through a heavy soil. So we're going to look for a mixture of potting soil, sand, bone meal, things that are very light in texture. And Kim, I'm going to take the camera back again. So we know that we don't typically promote brands. So what we're looking here is one particular brand of soil for cactus, very large container. And what we're going to find in this type of bag is, without spilling it all over me, is something that's very light. And see, when I'm picking it up, it's not clumping together. It's very loose so that those fine cacti, succulent roots can push through it. And they don't need a lot of dirt. You don't need a very large container. Now, if you feel that you have some soil in your area that's fairly lightweight the way that it is, or maybe you want to mix your own together, something that you might want to add to it is an inorganic material called perlite. Perlite looks, feels, and acts like styrofoam beads. You don't want it to cling to your hand. Okay? And it acts just like styrofoam in that it spreads all over too. Mix this with the lighter weight soil that you feel you have on hand that would be useful, and maybe add in a little bit of sand to it. The perlite gives some structure, some space in between your soil, so again, those roots can move through. It also will help hold the water and absorb water, because when we talk about water, we need to talk about succulents' feet. So let's go on to the next one. Kim, let's go to our next slide. Watering. This is the big question with succulents. Succulents seem a very easy plant to grow, and that basically you can forget about them other than when you need to water. And how much watering, we're going to start back with where they grew and a little bit of the botany there in the desert. A large desert that covers part of Mexico and southern United States is the Chihuahua Desert. It receives about 7 inches of rain annually. This past weekend in the area that my husband and I live in Minnesota, we had 3 inches of very gentle rain over about 48 hours. Perfect for watering our flower gardens, vegetable gardens, the crops in the fields, soaked in wonderfully. But when it rains in the Chihuahua Desert, it doesn't rain for 3 days gently. It rains suddenly, and they are going to receive 3-4 inches of rain in just a matter of hours. It's an all or nothing situation. So our succulents in their thick leaves are going to soak up as much water as possible, store it, and then they will go months without being rained on again. And we need to remember that when we're watering our succulents, and it's an all or nothing situation. We want to water them generously, but we want to allow them to dry very completely between watering. Those fine succulent roots, their little feet do not like to be in water. They will rot very quickly because they are not used to being in water. That is not how they originated. That is not how they grew. And overwatering is the single most cause, as our slide here says, of death of succulents. We do too good a job with them. We think that they're related to our ivies or ferns that like moist soil, that need a lot of moisture to keep their thin leaves healthy. But the succulents have changed their leaves so that they're storing water. You don't have to worry about them as much. Okay, Kim, I'm going to take it back again. So when you are working with your succulent, and most of us with plants, we'll take our finger and rub it on the dirt, you know. Oh, is it wet? Is it sticking on my finger? See, nothing's sticking on here because we want this to dry completely in between. And when we water it, we want it to drain out, flush it out completely. And watering with what? If I had some succulents in my home that I was maintaining right now, this past weekend would have been a wonderful opportunity for me to collect some rainwater. Succulents are used to our natural rainwater, not most city or rural waters, which have some type of chemical treatment to them or have gone through water purification process. Not your household water, which in addition may have gone through a water softener. Those often have too much magnesium in them or calcium, and we end up with white spots on the top of our dirt. So look for rainwater first, collect that, or if not, everybody can find a jug of distilled water, very easy to find in our stores nowadays. When you're watering your plant, again, make sure that you water it completely so it flushes out the bottom, which means that we want a container that has holes at the bottom. Preferably a clay pot, great drainage hole here, very easy for everything to dry out completely in between so we don't get any mold growing on the soil. But sometimes the pot that we fall in love with, that's just the perfect color, it doesn't have a hole at the bottom. So what you need to do then is, if you know someone with a drill and a very sharp bit, particularly a bit for that drill that's called a diamond bit, they can drill a hole for you. Or take one of these broken clay pots and make a shelf for your plant. So we're going to put a few pieces in there. The curved pieces, it's giving us a little space up. We'll still have that covered with our dirt. We'll have our plant on top. But this way, if there's any extra water, if we get carried away with watering and are taking too good of a care of our plant, then the water can sit here at the bottom underneath our little clay shelf and not have the roots be in the water on it. How do you know if you're overwatering the plant? Well, our succulent leaves are going to take on a different look. If they have too much water in them, they're actually going to look translucent. And if you've had your plant for a while, so you know what the leaves normally look like, they're going to look swollen because they've picked up so much water that that water is breaking down the cell tissue in the leaf. And then pretty quick, those leaves are going to fall off and you're going to find something like this laying on the soil in your pot. Another sign of overwatering, which is a real shock when it happens, is that they will have root rot right at the bottom. And really the top of the plant doesn't look so bad. And then suddenly you touch it or you go to test the soil and the whole thing comes off level with the dirt. And you have plant here and you have roots in the pot because it's rotted off at the soil level from too much moisture. How do we make sure that we don't overwater? Measuring, especially on very small plants, like those two, or here's another succulent that almost looks like an ivy plant. In fact, it has the name of stone crop to it, that on these small pots, this plant would probably go into this pot if I transplanted it. And is that after you've watered it once or twice so that it runs out the bottom, rinses out, flushes itself out, make a mental note or keep a plant diary of how much did I water. Was it a half cup? Was it a cup? Because they really are used to a very small amount of water. When you start a new plant, then you're going to want to water it. Make sure that it stays moist about the first 7 to 10 days so that the roots take. After that, let it dry out. Let it be a desert plant that you really don't have to pay a lot of attention to. Okay, Kim, let's go to the next one. Okay, so there's our watering. Yeah, we can't talk too much about watering with succulents. See, we have one more that's a photo. There it is. Okay, this is some really great photos of some succulents. Aren't they beautiful looking? And it also gives us some ideas. You'll see in the upper left there, that one is all rocks. There's a little bit of soil in the center, but it's mostly rocks, pebbles, and you'll find that with our cactus too. The larger blue bowl with all the blue stones in it is something else that helps with succulents, with drainage. It helps prevent root rot because it doesn't have the soil right next to them. It has the pebbles that they're resting on. And they're just beautiful. The colors are wonderful on them. But particularly on that larger blue pot, we want to comment that that's really too many plants. It's really too crowded for that container because we want those succulents to get bigger. So if we look at those 6 small purple ones, if we envisioned and are hoping that each of them become as large as a yellowish colored one in the center, it's not going to happen when they're that crowded. When you're planting those tiny succulents, give them lots of space. They need space to absorb the water, space for the roots to grow, space to absorb nutrients. Okay, and then the very last thing that we're going to talk about, I'll have Kim give the camera back to me, is something that happens to everybody with plants. And that is, my succulent is dying. It doesn't look very good, okay? And what's happening here? This was a very tiny pot. It's about this size. They're called 2-inch pots. And this little guy just isn't taking. His roots have not pushed out into the soil. I can pick him up just like this. And so far he's actually doing pretty good. There's no soil level root rot happening. His leaves aren't swollen, partly because he's not pulling up much moisture on it, and his color is still pretty good on it. So what's happening with him? Well, I know it's not overwatered because I can scrape all the way to the bottom of the bowl and it's dry, right? So why isn't he taking? Is he too dry? Actually, I think what happened on this one, and I want to go back to that perlite because that perlite's kind of fun to work with. I had some younger gardeners help me mix up this soil. And I think they got carried away. We having a little too much fun adding that perlite. And the perlite is so busy soaking up the moisture that my little succulent isn't getting his turn. So what I'm going to do is I am going to find a different container for him, mix up a different ratio of soil and perlite with a lot less weight in it, make sure that he's moist for the first week, and try it again. Now, what if I found pebbles, the leaves, laying, not beside this succulent because it's not his leaves, but if I found them laying on my pot soil next to my succulent, well, then they're probably rotting off and you might find them dark at the corners. What you can do is you can attempt, and it works about 50% of the time for most of us gardeners, is to start these in a pot, put them in an appropriate soil mixture, just tuck them in like that, water them, keep them moist for the first 7 to 10 days, and then you should be able to feel that they've taken root. When you touch them, there's going to be a little tug. Those roots are holding it into the soil. Some of them, of course, are not going to take, they'll dry up. Some of them may become too moist and will rot, they'll swell up and then turn black. But it's always worth a try. And sometimes you have really good luck with it. No matter if you find that your pot is too wet, if when you're digging down in it, you go, uh-oh, wet finger, then a typical reaction is, I'm gonna set it outside in the sunshine and help it dry out, right? No, we don't want already stressed out from too much moisture, and too much sunshine is gonna be even more of a stress. If at all possible, take your hands, take a really large clump of dirt in your plant, move him out of that soggy bottom soil, move him over to a different container, and hopefully by taking a large amount of soil with him, you won't have disturbed the roots. And when you put him in a drier soil container, he'll be able to dry off. if you find a plant, and I didn't happen to have one that bad today, that has split itself, that's left the roots here and the plant's falling over, let those roots dry out. And wow, this seems like a really opposite recommendation. Let those roots dry out so that the excess moisture is gone, and then repot them. Sometimes they will rejuvenate because desert plants are really hardy things. Succulents can be wonderful to grow. We have lots of different options, lots of different colors. And if we get the amount of water under control, along with a lot of sunlight, they're really low maintenance plants. So our 4-Hers that are with us, did you have any questions in the chat box? What are you growing for succulents? Anybody?
I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone wants to type anything in, or you can unmute at this time too and ask any questions to Brenda if you want.
You can unmute and tell me what you are growing, if you feel like it. It's not required.
Have either of you grown any succulents, or are you just wanting to learn a little bit before you start growing?
My mom has an aloe plant.
Oh yes, and aloe plants are succulents. Yes.
And a jade plant.
Yep.
And a jade plant, you said too? Okay.
Yep.
They're wonderful. Jade plants can get really, really big. They can look like little trees.
Yeah, ours is real small because I just stole a leaf from my mom, so it's only about got to 3 inches, so that's good, girl.
Okay, so if you stole a leaf from your mom, how did you start that? How did you propagate it? What worked for you?
The way that you said, just sticking it right in.
Yes.
I did it different. I did one sticking in and one sideways because I heard you could do it either way.
Yes.
This one did not work.
Okay. Okay. Yes, it seems like just so simple. It's like, no, we have to do something else. We're used to dividing irises and storing gladiola bulbs over the winter and just fussing with it a lot more. And they really are hardy plants.
I'm used to other house plants where you stick them in water for a month or 2.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and most house plants, too much water isn't a possibility. Sometimes fern plants or ivies will get a mold or a scum around the plant line from too much water. But in most cases, we can't overwater. And Carrie says, thanks for the info. That's wonderful. Kim, was there anything else you were hoping the 4-Hers would hear? I wanted to go online and see what materials U of M 4-H provided for 4-Hers, but as Kim and I talked about a little bit earlier, we had some updates done on my computer and I didn't have access to the internet the way that I wanted the past few days. So I'm positive that you must have some wonderful 4-H plant science books, or can get those from National 4-H Supply. And I really encourage people to purchase those, purchase one for your family to share or a couple to pass around the clubs. There's a great deal of research done in those and they are just super reliable information.
Well, if nobody has any other questions, we want to give a big thank you to Brenda.
Oh, look at, here's somebody's photo.
Oh, cool.
Hey, yes. How wonderful. Those are beautiful. Great variety of plants there.
We don't know what those ones are called, but we have those ones too.
You have those ones too? I just don't do very well with some of the scientific names on things. I always worry I'm going to mispronounce them. So usually I just say, it's beautiful and it's different. Thank you. Good for you. Well, I hope I have the opportunity to meet some of you in public sometime when we can do more gatherings again. But this was a wonderful evening. Oh, some more. Yeah.
That's our baby Jade.
That's your baby Jade. Okay. Does baby Jade have a drain hole at the bottom of that cup?
Not a drain hole, but I usually put, oh, it has a tiny one. It has styrofoam and rocks on the bottom.
Oh,
Okay,
yay.
that's another good option.
Good for you. Yes. Yes. That helps too, by all means on it. But it is so difficult sometimes when we find the perfect pot that we want for decor, or someone's given us a gift and we want to use it and it doesn't have a hole in it.
Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for sharing, and thank you, Brenda, for being with us today. I know I learned a lot about succulents as well, so thank you.
Okay, it was absolutely wonderful.